All right. Well, welcome everyone. It's so nice to see you guys. Thank you guys for joining us. Hey, Claudette, nice to see you. We are so excited to introduce our new online course through Arenas for Change called Facilitating with Children. Launched officially today, and people can access this on the Arenas for Change website as a member. So we're going to share with you guys a little bit of behind the scenes about creating that course and some of our insights gained from creating this course. So I want to first start off by saying hi. I'm Lynn Thomas. I'm co-founder and CEO of Arenas for Change, or ARCH, as we say for short. And very excited to have our special guest here today, Tova Searleman, who is we invited as a special guest panelist as part of the course and has a specialization working with children. And so, Tova, I'm going to turn it over to you to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. As Lynn said, I'm Tova Searleman, and I'm an LMHC, currently working for a small group practice called Aviv Counseling today I'm in our office in Andover, where I do play therapy, which is the first love of my life, professionally speaking. And then we also have a satellite farm location in West Newbury, Mass, which is where I am 3 days out of the week doing equine assisted psychotherapy, utilizing the ARCH framework, which I first learned from Miss Lynn Thomas herself. So super lucky that I had that opportunity to be trained by the best at the beginning of my equine assisted therapy career.
Well, that's very kind. Thank you, Tova. And just to share, we connected at a training, in-person training there at Aviv Counseling in Massachusetts, which is where you are working in an amazing team, amazing clinic and group of people. And we got to talking about your passion and your knowledge and experience working with children. And I was so engaged and fascinated. And we get a lot of questions about, well, how do you apply some of techniques or facilitation styles working with children, and thought, well, this would be a good make for an interesting course. And so we decided to create this course where you guys get to actually watch a session in action. And then we have a panelist that we talk about and debrief the insights, the learnings of watching the actual session and play out. And so we're hoping to be joined by Lynn Moore, one of the co-facilitator. Myself and Lynn Moore co-facilitated the session with these kids aged 5 to 11. It was a group of siblings, 4 siblings. Lynn is going to try to join us. She ended up having to be taken away on another thing, but she's going to see if she can join. So if we hopefully we'll see her as we go along here. But I just want to first share too with these courses. So ARCH is based on a foundation of values and a framework. And I like to say it's a framework in the sense that it's not a do this or do that. It's not these are the interventions and very specific around that. It's really acknowledging that all of us are coming as professionals, whether we be mental health, education, coaching realm, whether we incorporate horses or maybe nature or other environments, that we come with our styles, we come with our knowledge and skill sets and experience. And a framework here is really looking at what we hold as a mindset that can help us really create an emotionally safe environment that helps us get deeper, faster, and just looks at the nuances of how we're holding space for stories to unfold and learning to happen and growth and change to happen. So the ARCH framework is called the SEEN Keystones, and that sense of self, empowering mindset, externalizing story, and natural flow. And it's a set of questions under each of those areas that we ask ourselves. And that helps guide us in how we might choose to intervene or how we might choose to hold space in the context that we're all working. And so it was really fun getting to work with young children. I will say up front that is not my area of background or experience. I have worked a lot with adolescents and families. And so that's a lot of my background. And so that's why I really enjoyed talking with you, Tova, because I especially enjoyed your passion about working with the younger kids and what we can learn from that will help us actually be better facilitators no matter what age we're working with.
Mhm.
So I'd love to just kind of hear a little bit about your background. What drove you, or what drives you in your passion to work with young children?
Absolutely. I started my journey to becoming a therapist out of college. I got a job doing early intervention, so the 0 to 3 set. And I always wanted to work with children. I had a dream when I was in the 6th grade that I would become a child therapist and get a PhD and all those things. And it didn't really occur to me at the time that 0 to 3 was an area where anybody could do therapy because it's so young. But then when I got that job, it was a first job out of college, bachelor's level provider type of a deal. I really had the opportunity to see just how complex the world of young children is. And these specific young children also had autism diagnoses. So people that we may, or many may consider to not necessarily have a lot that they're thinking about if you don't know. It turns out that their inner world is quite complex and storied and varied, and they've got a lot of feelings and a lot of opinions, and they have worldviews that are just as strong as that of adults. They just haven't had the experience to understand, adult concepts and more abstract thoughts. So I had the opportunity to learn a lot about how to understand somebody else's viewpoint through a person who couldn't effectively communicate because they were so young, and because of their presentations, they didn't necessarily communicate with words. And I spent almost 10 years of my career doing early intervention with young children diagnosed with autism, 0 to 3. Some of that time I spent in the 3 to 9 program. So I had an opportunity to see what working with children was like with slightly older kids who did have much more of a grasp of vocabulary. And I felt like they were teaching me more than I was teaching them. 24/7, every day was an adventure. What am I going to learn today? How am I going to get schooled today by this 3-year-old? Every day was an adventure. And I carried that into my future jobs, which included in-home therapy, where I was working with kids, most of whom did not carry an autism diagnosis, but they carried some sort of diagnosis, which is how they were able to qualify for services. And with that job, I was going into homes, just as I was going into homes for early intervention, but I was going into homes specifically to work with families. So I had the opportunity to really do a lot of work and a lot of exploration about family systems. And that was something that I hadn't had the opportunity to do with the previous job that I had. So there are just more and more characters added to the story when you have not only a child that you're working with where you're trying to do specific skills. Today, we're going to try to teach you how to point. Today, we're going to try to teach you how to ask for juice, but to really mend family systems to support everybody within the family and having a better experience. And I always really loved working with the children because very few people bother to ask kids how they feel and what they want. And many adults don't take children seriously and respect their needs, respect their wishes, respect their ideals, their goals, their dreams. And as a therapist, I feel like everybody, no matter what your age, your station in life, your culture, everybody deserves respect. And everybody deserves to have access to an environment where they can learn how to show up as their best self. And for me, children are no exception to that.
Yeah, I love that. I think that was one of the big highlights for me, is just really that honoring and respecting, no matter the age, young children, they still have a story that's being shared. It just might be a different context with different kinds of characters, and they have a different language in how that story is shared.
Mm-hmm.
It was interesting. So in this course, in the session that we did with these 4 children, so we had a group of siblings ages 5 to 11. And we did incorporate horses. We incorporated art, nature. And for us, we didn't have a set objective. This was a group we invited just for the filming. And we didn't have a set objective as a result. We made that decision from a filming standpoint that we weren't going to work with an actual real mental health client. But anyway, one of the things that are standing out for me in this one, with not having an objective, we were just going to see what unfolded. We did decide in this particular course that we would put more direct use of story tools. So part of the ARCH framework is holding a story mindset. We look at experiences that our clients are having, experiences we're having as a story. Who are the main characters? Who are the supporting impact characters? What is what is looking to undergo transformation? What are the plot twists? We kind of go through all the story kind of concepts. And usually a lot of times we just hold that as a mindset that helps us guide in what we might look for and how we might understand what's happening. In this session, we decided to actually utilize direct story language with the kids, invite them into saying, we framed the experience as an actual, we're going to be together creating a story and let's see what story unfolds. And so it was really interesting to see what unfolded. And one of the things that stood out for me in that, from what you're even sharing here, one, like, kids really aren't that different from horses. It feels like they have their stories and they have their own type of language that they use to share their stories. And it was very interesting to see, especially with the diverse age range we had from ages 5 to 11. So very different developmental levels as well. So very different styles of how a story was going to unfold. But yeah, I mean, I'm wondering your thoughts, Tova, about when you see kids and what you experienced even in this course. How do you hold that space, or what are you looking for them to be able to share their stories effectively and in a safe way?
Yeah, specifically with horses, you mean?
Well, actually, in any environment, it could be, whether it be with the horses or in the work that you do in your office. Even what is it? What are some highlights you find in how you hold that space for them to be their authentic selves, to share their story? Because just like adults, they have a story to share.
Yeah, I think the first thing that I tend to do is explain to my clients why I'm different than all the other adults in their life, that I'm not a teacher. I'm not going to give them grades. They don't have to mask if they're dealing with emotional issues or social issues. They don't have to be the person that the world is telling them that they have to be when they're in the space with me, whether it's on the farm or in the play space, and really give them permission to show up the way they feel like showing up and not the way they feel like they're supposed to show up. And that's been my first step, almost exclusively in my process, working with kids and making sure that I get consent as well, or assent rather, since they can't legally consent to outpatient therapy services, but getting their buy-in by explaining who I am, what I do, why I like to do it, and ways that I'm different than all the other grownups in their life that are, in their experience, most likely trying to repress them and trying to make them feel like they're not allowed to have the feelings and the experience that they have. They're supposed to have different feelings and different behavior and different experience. But with me, they can be who they are. And then we explore whether being who they are in terms of their behavior is working for them or not working for them, based on their own goals and their own desires, their own perceptions. If things are working for them, but they're not really working for them because there are things that are unsafe happening, or they're experiencing functional impairment, they just don't have the insight for it yet, then I try to use play or horses to see if I can help them use metaphor to explain why things that they're going through might not be working for somebody else, or maybe it's a stuffed toy or whatever it might be. And if they do have insight around, okay, this isn't working for me, then it's pretty easy to let them share their story, because they've already started saying, yeah, this isn't working for me. This is why, let me tell you, or play to you, or show you, whatever their communication may be, whether it's through play or behavior or words or silence, just letting them be and letting them lead the way.
Well, I think that was one of the biggest learnings for me in this process. And then as we debriefed as a panelist team afterwards, watching the sessions together, and was, the be with. And I think, Tova, you had said that attunement with, how important, and really that's the priority. I think there were times for my sense of self in the process, because I was like, oh, I don't know what to do. This is not my population. So there's some really good learnings of like, okay, I'm struggling as a facilitator.
You did a great job, Lynn. Don't sell yourself.
But yeah, no, I think just that power of how important it is just to be with and honor that space of them being them.
Yes. Even if they're talking about Pokemon or whatever might, that's what's on their mind. And that's no less important to them than, say, a problem someone's having at work is to an adult. Just as everything in therapy means something for adults, everything in therapy means something to kids too. And you always have an opportunity to use whatever they're bringing into the space to build rapport, to attune with, to make a note of, and then maybe bring back later for use when you're speaking about something that is a little more concrete in terms of insurance-based outpatient therapy goals. There are always things that we can do to honor their space and what is important to them.
Yeah. And I think as soon as we start to put our agenda, that was like, okay, I have an agenda. We need to get somewhere. Then it's really easy to not be attuned with anymore as soon as that starts kind of clogging, which is hard because as a therapist, you have treatment goals, you have places you're trying to get these kids. How do you balance that of just truly being present and being with versus you have these agendas?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. And it's definitely part of the daily struggle of the medical model for people who want to be their authentic self with kids and let kids be their authentic self. And then they have this other piece of things that's part of our profession. Something I always explain to parents is that my number one boss is the child. And then my number two boss are the parents and the system and those sorts of things. But if the child is coming into therapy and they don't feel like that is their space, we're not going to get anywhere. And all of the interventions and the worksheets and all of whatever education I might have and all of my experience, it doesn't mean anything if the child doesn't feel like that's their space to be themselves. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I tell parents, if they're telling me, well, the kid's having trouble in school and they're explaining the problem constellation, I let them know basically that it's the child's choice whether to work on these things or not work on these things. And if the child tells me the only thing I care about is getting better at field hockey, then we're talking about field hockey for however long it takes. But we're not necessarily only talking about field hockey, because if we're talking about field hockey, we're also talking about what kind of social skills you need to show up, what kind of communication skills you need with your teammates, both in and out of game, what kind of physical regulation skills you need to go up and down as needed, both in game and out of game. And there are ways to sneak in therapy while the child is getting their goals and their needs met that are genuine to them. We as an aside can work on those other objectives. And generally what I've found is that when we as clinicians are honoring what the kids want, they finally feel seen, no pun intended. They feel heard, they feel acknowledged, they feel validated. And when kids are feeling seen, heard, and validated, they're more interested in giving you the behaviors that you're looking for, because generally attention seeking or negative behaviors are about seeking connection.
All right. Oh, I love that.
It all comes together.
Yeah. Well, and that kind of, there's been some comments in here about spontaneity of the story, how kids and horses are wide open. And well, kids are a lot like horses, wide open and authentic.
Kids are like adults too, adults come into therapy, they have their agenda, they know what they want to work on, hopefully, or much of the time. And kids have their agendas too. It may not look the same as what their parents' agendas are, but they exist, and they're just as salient to the kids as the parents' agenda is to the parents.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's all perspective. And when we're in the middle of our own story, that's we're first person. We're the main character in our story. That's the perspective the story is being experienced from.
Exactly.
So, yeah, it says here, right on, kids first. Thanks, Becky. How to follow the storyline. This is where I'm continuing to grow. I may need more tools. Yeah, love.
This may help you there. Lots of
Yeah. Actually, that's a big part I think we talked about in the course as well, is really working to follow the story, because it was all unpredictable. I mean, we went into this with zero goals except for the goal that we are filming, and hopefully we'll have some learning through this process. But really how to just moment to moment, that being present, support the story in unfolding whatever that story looks like. And it might be a story about Pokemon, might be a story about this or that. Yeah, so Lynn here says, love how the ARCH framework embraces that the child is the author and we follow the natural flow of the story. Yeah, which is one of our scene keystones.
I found that the ARCH framework is very, very similar to traditional Axelinean play therapy, or a child-led play therapy. There's a little more of a structure with the ARCH framework, but it's more about, in my own experience anyway, it's about a structure for my brain as opposed to an imposed structure on the child. And that's, in my opinion, why it works so well. So it's with both play therapy and the ARCH framework, it really is, as we've said, about letting children be the author of the story, letting them lead. Becky asked a great question with very, very young children. How do you keep them safe around horses? That's a fabulous question. Lynn, do you want to tackle it, or do you want me to jump in? What do you think?
Well, actually, I'm going to, Becky, kind of align that question with what you were also just talking about, Tova, which is about how much structure. Mm-hmm. Because that was kind of one of, I know, my own personal battle I was having inside myself doing this session with these kids was, how much structure do we put on? How open do we leave it? How much do they need developmentally, concrete structure? We had a very interesting conversation at one point, because we had our introduction and our framing. We'll share a little bit more about that. And then it was this moment of, okay, we're going to invite them into the space and do some things with the horses. And I had this moment of said, so we're going to check in about 5 minutes or 10 minutes or however long, And we talked about this because the reason it came out like that was because I was like, oh, maybe if it's too broad, then that doesn't feel safe. And I know this is getting beyond the horses, Becky, there, but just emotionally, if it's too broad, maybe that's not safe. If it's too structured, maybe that's also not safe. So I did this like, oh, I should put some structure on it, but oh, maybe that's too much structure. So I'm going to say, or 10 minutes or whatever. And
your SOS was
yeah, this is kind of like, okay, we're just going to do whatever. But it was interesting. We had a conversation about even just time, about how often adults tell, time of, I tell kids all the time, hey, we're going to be leaving in 5 minutes, but really it's 20 minutes later that they finally leave. And the concept of time and all about that. But yeah, and we'll weave this into the question about safety too. But first, I just wanted to ask about your thoughts about how much structure do you feel is good for kids in the sessions that you do, whether it be in an office or with horses?
It 100% depends on the kid. Some kids really need to just have space to do whatever they want for a little bit, because they're in their life, they're being told what to do every second of every day, and they don't have the opportunity to decompress from that. And other kids are not really able to thrive without structure. So I have some kids who come in, whether it's on the farm or in the office, and the first thing we do is we write down our schedule for the session. Even though it's only 50 minutes, we write down our schedule. And I have one kid who literally writes down, say hello, and then crosses out, say hello, and then writes the next thing, because that child really, really wants everything to be very structured, because that's what makes that child feel safe. So it depends. You have to know your kid, and you have to know yourself and how much structure you can tolerate versus how little structure you can tolerate while still being present and effective with the child. So I do want to circle back to Becky's question. Is that's okay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's kind of where bringing back, bridging the structure, and how much structure do we provide in regards to both emotional and physical safety around horses as well. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Did you have some thoughts on that, Tova?
I do. In this, I've only been doing the equine assisted therapy for a few years now. So others who are more seasoned may have different opinions or answers on this. But for me, the first thing is knowing your herd and knowing which horses can tolerate things like loud noises, which horses are spooky, which ones might not be spooky. I'm very lucky in that the herd that I work with, they're not my personal horses, but the horses that I work with are very used to being around children. They're used for riding lessons. They're around kids all the time. The woman who owns the space and the horses does a pony experience with 2, 3, 4 little kids to introduce them to horses. So I know that this specific herd that I work with is not really going to react if a kid walks right behind them, or if a kid walks up to them and is loud or dysregulated. Other people, their horses are different, just like kids are all different, adults are all different, the horses are different. And if you happen to know that you have a kiddo that gets very physically dysregulated and a horse that's pretty spooky, definitely adding structure to that to support everyone's safety needs. I utilize cross ties pretty frequently with my little kids because sometimes having 4 horses in a paddock and a 5-year-old who may run free, that's a bad idea waiting to happen. So oftentimes I'll grab one pony that I know that child has a particular relationship with, and we'll cross tie that pony so that kid can have an experience with them where everybody is safe, the horses and the child. So those are a couple ideas that I have. I don't know if you want to piggyback, since you have much more experience with equine in general than I do.
Well, when you guys watch the course, you'll see 2 words that stood out. Well, one word that stood out for me that you were sharing there, Tova, was dysregulation. And the other word that came to my mind was chaos. So you'll see we actually had a pretty large space. We actually had 2 spaces with a gate that was open in between. I mean, looking back, I think we'd probably, plus for filming, it was a little bit crazy because we had 4 kids, 2 kids going this way, 2 kids going that way. And it's like, wait, how do we watch it all? How do we kind of hold that space? So I think, preparing your space, of course, knowing your horses, like you said. That Becky mentions, that the horses need to be used to a lot of different scenarios and legs grabbed. I have experienced, though, that horses seem to know when it's kids.
Mm-hmm.
Seem to know the difference with unintentional kids being kids and kind of more manipulative things that adults might do with horses. So I've just experienced some really cool things watching horses seemingly take care of these kids, even when it feels a little chaotic. There were times you'll see us in the course where we move closer, where we try to give space, where we invite the kids to come over to kind of move them in a different space. So those are all things we're looking at. One of the things I will say around dysregulation and chaos. So at times it did look chaotic, and that can be scary from a sense of self standpoint as a facilitator. It's like, oh my gosh, it's chaos. Is anything even good happening here? We also shared in this particular, these kids seemed very regulated, much more than we expected them to be. I mean, not because they're good kids and stuff like that. Again, it's not good or bad. I shouldn't even say that. Sorry, scrap that. But I was expecting a little bit even more chaos than there was, I guess, because I'm not usually working with young kids.
And you had several at once.
What's that?
You had several at once in the outpatient setting. In my practice, I've just got the kid and myself and the horses. So I've got a little triangle. You had a pentagon. You had an octagon.
Right. Yeah. So it felt more chaotic because there's a group. Do you have any thoughts about when you have kids that do show up a little more dysregulated emotionally with their nervous system, or where times even in your practice where it feels chaotic? Mm-hmm. How do you handle that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, it depends on the child. It's different for every child because one kid's dysregulated is another kid's baseline. So knowing whether my kid they have a busy body, I call it, versus whether they're emotionally in that borderline when they arrive. With some kids, I'll do a grounding exercise before we start. With many children, I use the zones of regulation. That seems to be very effective with kids, and it's non-shaming. We don't classify feelings in that using the zones of regulation as these are the good feelings and these are the bad feelings. These are the higher energy feelings and these are the lower energy feelings. So the green zone doesn't just mean happy. It also means calm, content, ready to learn, interested, as opposed to this is the good place. It's just, this is the place. The yellow zone doesn't just mean irritated, frustrated. It also means excited. Maybe it means surprised. Maybe it means so very interested in a way that's high energy, so they can't focus on what they're doing. So teaching kids how to have insight around how regulated they are and to connect safety with a sense of safety with that dysregulation. So like I said, the horses that I work with are fine with kids who have a busier body, or, I always say the rule is no running in the paddock for obvious reasons, but I do have kids that will forget that rule. They're, 5, 6 years old. I know that there's safety around that. So this is an opportunity for them to practice, remembering their walking feet in a way where there's perceived negative things that might happen, but I know that these horses are actually fine with it because I have experience with these specific horses. So yeah, doing a grounding exercise if need be with the specific kid, not doing a grounding exercise and letting the kid be and letting the horses respond to that as they will or won't. And many of the kids learn, at least with, again, my herd, they learn that if they have a busier body, the horses aren't going to walk up to them. Like these specific horses are not interested in being around a kid who doesn't have control over their body to the degree that the horses wish. So they learn how to self-regulate on their own. I would obviously never let a kid into a paddock that was not able to follow directions, like come back to me right now, freeze your feet, those sorts of things. If I feel like a child can't follow those directions, we don't go in the paddock, and we utilize the horses in other ways. Maybe we feed them through the fence, or we make up a story about them by, seeing how far we can get away from them and still see them. So there are a lot of ways to use the horses if the child isn't regulated enough to be in the space safely. But I always do my best to try and get the kids to regulate so that they can safely engage hands-on with the horses and build and develop their insight around when they're regulated, they're safe. And when they're safe, they have more options to do the things that they like to do. So it's not about calm down, I don't like it. It's if we present to the world in this way, the world will give us more options.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. And that actually, there's a comment here. I used a short story today in a family session with 3 kids, which really helped with the discussion around emotions and what you do with them. The story was about a young boy and imaginary horse. A short story as a tool was awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts about utilizing story like that, Tova, or how you've experienced that?
Yeah, I love it. I do a lot of story writing, especially when I'm working with families. I do a number of family sessions. Not as many on the farm. My family sessions have tended to be more in an office setting, not by design. That's just how it's worked out. But yeah, using story is very powerful in therapy. I think I would talk for 3 hours if I actually started expounding upon that. But to keep it short, stories matter and stories are powerful, as you're always saying. And if we can make up a story about an imaginary horse that's going through as who was it? As Gateway Meadows Equine Assisted Services said. And it's the horse, the imaginary horse, that is the main character of the story experiencing all of the issues. Then we have the externalization happening, which is one of the scene keystones. So yeah, stories are very powerful. And we also have control over a story. We may not have control over ourselves, but we can decide what happens to the horse in the story. And where the child chooses to take the horse, or where the family system chooses to take the horse, is very telling of what they need to work on, and also what their own sense of self is in that moment.
Yeah, it was really interesting when in the course, watching the session that we did. As I mentioned, we decided to use some very direct story tools with this group of kids. And in the introduction, we invited them first to come up with a title, basically. What would they like to call our day together? Which they decided on Horse Adventure Camp was their title of the day. And then we invited them, we talked about the idea of stories and that we'd be creating a story together. And we asked them what type of stories they like. And it was really interesting because each of the kids shared their favorite story or show or whatever. And it almost ended up being like a personality test. I wrote Alice, who's 11, her favorite show is an adventure show. So it's all about adventure. Martin, who's 10, his favorite, he likes to read National Geographic. It's all about facts and documentary. And then Bridget, who's 7, her favorite show is a mystery. Mm-hmm. And then Vincent, who's 5, his favorite show was about friendships, and it's funny, and they all about their friendships. And it was really interesting to see how those personality tendencies actually played out through the day, including one of my favorites. We invited them at one point to see who the main character of their story might be out in the space. And we went out with the horses, and the 3 of them chose horses. Bridget, who's the 7-year-old, she found a bug. And the bug was her main character in the story. And this bug, when I actually later in the process, I get to go see the bug. First of all, I can't believe she even saw this bug. They're as big as a speck of pepper. And she was the one who likes mysteries. And it was like you needed a magnifying glass to see this bug, and how she saw something so small and detailed on a flower that's that tiny. And that became her primary character in the story. So it was kind of cool to see how that played out. And again, I wasn't sure at a cognitive level, developmentally, how that was going to fit with this, but all the ages, even the 5-year-old, it seemed like story, even talking about stories and main characters and what adventure are they going to go on and what are the challenges, because all heroes have struggles and challenges, and what are they going to go through, and what are they going to face as they attempt to go find what they're looking for in their story. So yeah, it actually ended up resonating more than I wasn't sure. But stories really do seem to, at all ages, seem to kind of have a connection.
Absolutely. Hi, Kathy. Sorry, I didn't ask your name before. I kind of panicked when I saw that it was your work moniker that popped up. I noticed Becky asked another question. Would you hold their hand and walk with them if they are dysregulated? So I'll give my answer for what I personally do, not saying this is the right way. I personally would only take a child's hand and walk with them if we need to walk out of the paddock quickly and they're struggling to do so, either because there's a safety situation, maybe there's a thunderstorm coming, or whatever it might be. If we need to exit the paddock quickly and the child is not able to listen, I might ask, may I take your hand and let's exit together. I personally wouldn't feel comfortable about holding a child's hand for any prolonged length of time during therapy. And my personal practice is that if they're not able to regulate themselves without that physical contact, I personally would not want them to be around horses without there being an additional measure in place, like a cross tie or something. Not saying that's the only way or the right way. I know myself well, and I can tolerate a decent amount of chaos, but once it gets beyond a certain point, I feel I'm not able to be with the children and be effective as a clinician. So in my practice, I personally would only take their hand and walk with them for purposes of supporting them around regulating if it were a safety situation or an emergency situation and I needed to get them out of the paddock swiftly.
Thanks. Yeah, Lynn shared, I personally have been more concerned about safety when working with adults.
Yeah, I've never had a kid go under or grab a leg or kick a leg. I have had a couple of kids go, I'm going to go kick that horse. And okay, go ahead, because I know they're not going to do it. And then they look at me, really? Yeah, if you think you can. Oh, never mind. I've had that a couple times, but I've never had any children push the boundary on purpose. Mm-hmm. And they're a kid that struggles to maintain boundaries or follow directions because of inattention or impulsivity or whatever it may be, then we don't go in the paddock that day if they're not able to ground. And that's okay. We do something else that they also find motivating and they get something out of.
Yeah. Well, and the horses are so good at confronting behaviors in a way that seems to be very effective. We had an adolescent once. It wasn't a kid, a younger child, but an adolescent, like, I'm going to get on this horse, which, and he just went to go jump on top of the horse's back, and the horse went, whoop, and he went right over the other side. Okay, I know this might not be from a safety, but again, that was a very effective confrontation. We didn't want that to happen, but this was a troubled adolescent. It was actually within the prison system that we were working with, and actually it was an incredibly effective intervention that horse did. And he was fine. His ego wasn't fine. But
needed a little realignment anyway.
Yeah. But like I said, I've seen horses give love and attention when you think they wouldn't, like when they do engage, when you think they ought to be maybe move away, and that they don't. And it's like they see through what really needs to happen in that moment. And I appreciate what you're saying, Tova, is there's a threshold. And especially for ourselves, if we're not feeling comfortable, we're not going to be able to be effective as facilitators. And honoring that. Lynn also shared, observing and watching the various energy levels of our equine herd too can be helpful for our younger clients to gain insights. So back to the power of observation. If it's not a good time to be in the space, so much that can be done walking around other aspects of the location, watching the horses. Nature itself is full of potential characters to have an impact in their story.
I've been very lucky that it's happened to rain at exactly the right story moments on a number of occasions when I've done outdoor therapy.
Yeah, it's beautiful what can happen. So you guys, I thank you so much for coming and watching this. Tova, do you have any other insights, thoughts about working with children that you'd like to share?
I guess I would say don't be afraid to jump in. If you're a person that has a lot of experience with adults and you're very comfortable with yourself as a clinician and you want to try something new, don't be scared of the kids. They're already scared of the world enough as it is. We don't need to be scared of them too. And we do have so much to learn from children. And frankly, they deserve to have access to mental health support just like anybody else. So if you jump in, they will join us on the journey as well.
And so much the power of that relationship, that we are all of our stories are impacting each other's stories. So that time and connection that we're in one another's space is part of the healing. And I love that. I used to say with my work with adolescents and working in residential that I felt like all therapists ought to spend time working as frontline staff in residential programming because of the value of what you learn.
Yes.
From these youth. And of course, like you're sharing, even young children, what we learn from them, and how I think it helps us see things in a way that will, like I said, I feel really benefit us no matter what age group we're working with.
100%.
So, well, everybody, we invite you guys, if you'd like to check out the course, if you're an Arch member, it's there now on the platform under courses. If you're not, you can easily join Arch and access the course. For our monthly subscription is only $35 a month. You can pause at any time and go in and take the course. We have multiple courses you can take, but feel free to check that out, or you can join as an annual member. We have organizational memberships. For your whole access, you can get a cool hat. Thank you, Tova. We're an artist.
Lynn is very, very proud of these hats that she designed. So I have to give her a little plug.
Well, actually, a friend designed it.
Or friend
I
designed.
invited her to design it, so I played a role. But yeah, no, we appreciate you guys joining us for this. We'll actually be connecting with Tova again at our community call coming up this next week, or for Arch members, and can't wait to hear what you guys think about the course when you go in and check it out. So, and we'd love to hear if you guys have any questions, thoughts, suggestions about this particular course, working with children, as well as any other topics. We'd love to support each other in Arch and learning as both learners and teachers. So appreciate you guys. Good to see you, and look forward to our next live together. Thanks. Thank you, Tova. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Lynn. And thank you everyone for coming, and thank you for being part of this world. The world needs more people like you. So thank you for showing up every day at work. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Bye, everybody.